Thank
Ready
you.
to go, Corey.
Great, so croeso, welcome to our show and tell for the design system for Wales Discovery. This is our last show and tell. Can't quite believe it. We are in May and we are wrapping it up today with what we are calling a showcase. So that means that we've got a lot of content to share with you, taking you through the journey of this discovery and ending with our final set of themes and recommendations. So with that in mind, what I would ask you to do is if you have questions, we're open to them. We love to have dialogue in the show and tells. Please pop them in the chat for us and we will try and get through all of them if we can in today's hour slot. If not, we are happy to take those questions offline and continue the conversation with you. So my name is Corey Hughes. I am the design director at Parago and we have been working in partnership with our colleagues at the Centre for Digital Public Services on this discovery. What we're going to cover off today, you can see on the screen in front of you, recap of the objectives, what we got up to during the discovery, the 11-week discovery that we've run, our approach, key findings, recommendations, and next steps. So I am joined today by the team at Parago who have been working on this project for the last 11 weeks. They will all be speaking at some point during the session, so I will let them introduce themselves. Parago, we are an organisation based here in Swansea in Wales, and we work with public sector organisations across Wales and beyond, our expertise being in user-centred design, delivery and communications. And this project is something that we've been very excited to be part of with the CDPS. So without further ado, we've got a lot to get through. I will hand over to my colleague Owen to give us a recap of where we started and the reason for this project. Owen, over to you.
Good afternoon all. I hope the sun is shining where you are after what's felt like a pretty long and bleak winter, so I'm thoroughly making the most of it. So by way of background, if you've attended previous show and tells, you may be aware the background to this work is public sector organisations typically develop digital services independently. And what we've seen through the discovery and what the CDPS have realised over the last year or so is often that can result in some inconsistent, frustrating and quite disjointed experiences for the people of Wales when they're trying to access digital services. A lot of those services tend to be designed by organisations working independently from one another and often by silos within the same organisations. So this discovery explored the needs of the users of a design system for Wales, what the scope of that could be, what some of the features may be, some of the constraints and the opportunities that a potential design system for Wales would need to be developed around. So this project, this discovery was 11 weeks, so just under 3 months, and we went about that in a typically agile fashion. So for those of you working in and used to working in agile way, we worked across sprints. So we had 6 sprints with regular goals, updates, stand-up meetings and reviews at the end of those sprints. And our delivery saw us, break that down into certain tasks. So a lot of time on planning, quite a lot of depth and detail to the research, speaking to individuals, organisations, even countries, and through a survey too. We then assessed everything we'd found, explored what may be possible, and presented those findings, which we'll be doing a little bit more of today. So I mentioned the time that we'd spent on the research, and we really uncovered some incredibly valuable insight from that. But I'm going to hand over to my colleague Em, who'll talk us through that research approach now.
Hi everyone, I'm Emma Northcote and I'm an engagement lead at Parago. So I've got the majority of this to take us through now. I'm not allowed to drive my own slides because I break stuff, so Sarah's going to do that for me. So if I nod, hopefully Sarah will know to change the slide for me. So I'll start off here in relation to the research approach with the expectations that we know that CDPS had in setting out to undertake the work. So these are the expectations as set out on the project page for this particular piece of work on the CDPS website. We took these expectations and we kept referring back to them regularly to make sure that we were on the right road, we were speaking with the right people, and we were sort of staying within the parameters of the research. So if we move on to the next slide. So the audience, as we identified them, and hopefully these are you're all in on the call now, but we were looking to speak to senior public service representatives across Wales. We were looking to speak with digital or development teams, individuals in design or development work, but not necessarily working within digital teams, or people outside of what you may think of as the sort of the usual team working on their own. We were really keen to speak with them, and digital design and development communities, so the communities that CDPS have and the communities that exist elsewhere. The first piece of work that we did in looking at this 11 weeks back was we set out to do some desk research. Obviously, one of the main differentiators for us here in Wales is the need for us to be able to provide bilingual services. And so we looked at the Ontario government's design system and looked at what they were using. We looked at the gov.uk system. We looked at Scottish Gov's system, and we looked at the Welsh Gov GEL. And the reason we looked at these, like I said, it was language with Canada. For Scotland, it was looking at how a nation has taken an existing design system and has really developed that to meet their needs. And we went back to speak with Scottish Gov only last week at the very end of this, because I was interested to see how they were taking forward language development on there, because I could see that they're using Gaelic on their website as well, and I was keen to see if there was a longer term plan there around the introduction of sort of a broader bilingual element to their website. So we've had quite some good conversations with people behind these as well. Gov.uk is a system, when we did the desk research, obviously it was a system that lots of other agencies have adopted and adapted themselves, and that came through as well in the research, that there's a large number of you guys who are taking parts from that. We spoke with the Cabinet Office around that, and we looked at how they intended to develop the gov.uk system going forward. They are really, really interested in what Wales are looking to do from the bilingual perspective, and there's an open door there for us to engage with them further down the line, if CDPS choose to do so in relation to upstreaming that work around the bilingual elements. Welsh Gov GEL, we spoke with Welsh Gov GEL a couple of times. We sort of bounced back and forth to them as a pinball after we'd been speaking with you, because it was referenced over and over really. And so the discovery and the questions that we had towards the end of this discovery work were quite different to those at the beginning. So we've done quite a bit of work around the GEL as well, but the desk research at the very beginning helped us get that footing in terms of understanding how these design systems should look. So the emerging themes from that was that design systems work well when they operate within tight governance. Typically that's within a large organisation where there may be a number of different services, but the functions within those services, they require a consistent approach in how they produce their content and their services. The adoption of design systems, or the adoption of design systems in a successful manner, mirrors the leadership buy-in. So if you've got that leadership buy-in at the top and everyone is on board with why you're using one system and what you're working towards, and there are implications for not adhering to the design system, then that's where a design system lands best. Design system teams are often on hand to offer advice, practical support. So what we saw when we spoke with those that are working with design systems was that they were a help desk, if you like, able to support people as they were implementing the elements of the design system, and that came through strongly in the desk research and when we went on to speak with people afterwards. And the emerging theme being a toolkit of common component styles and patterns that have been tested can create significant efficiencies for those designing digital services. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. It was part of the initial problem statement that we agreed with CDPS, was that the need to remove duplication in the process and drive more consistent services for communities was part of the issue that we were looking at the very beginning. So after the desk research, while we were doing the desk research, we were also busy in the background planning the one-to-one research sessions, and we were really, really grateful. And I can't say it enough, we said in the last show and tell and the one before, we were really overwhelmed with the number of people who put their hands up and wanted to speak to us. And you really have made a difference to the amount of things that we've been able to capture and how we have now been able to package that for the recommendations at the end. So speaking to you all from such a variety of backgrounds was brilliant. So we've had over 22 discussions, a lot more than 30. We've spoken to a lot more than 30 people from varied roles and backgrounds, because some of you brought other people with you to the call. So while we wrap this as a one-to-one session, some of you acknowledged that actually you needed a wider team to be there to have the full breadth of the conversation, so it's way more than 30, and then across 19 different organisations in Wales. We've looked at that, and you'll know from a previous show and tell that we had that breakdown across Wales, which we were really keen to get. We've spoken with heads of digital software managers, product development managers. The list is there, and obviously that reflects back against the audience of people that we'd set out to get in the first instance. So we're pleased with that as a breakdown. And like I said, we were really pleased with the people who came forward and were willing to speak. The emerging themes from the interviews that we did, and this is a really strong one that came through, was that the leadership attitudes to what digital services are and the perceived value that leaders have and the organisation has around user-centred design has a significant impact on the resourcing within the teams and design system usage as is at the moment. So we saw an organisation outside of Welsh Gov that has a full design system and a structure that mirrors the DDAP framework, and we also saw another team which was one person digitising forms, and when we went into the conversations and we looked at sort of the support that comes down through the organisation, how they are structured, how they've previously been staffed, where resourcing plans are for them currently, there was absolutely a link through to the leadership attitudes and the understanding at the leadership level of what good digital looks like. Another key finding that people use various elements of different design systems that are out there and seek good practice from various places, and the appetite for good practice and for tested elements was really, again, it was a strong theme that came through. People that we spoke with, probably in every conversation, people were really keen to learn from what others were doing. There's an appetite for reusable components and patterns that have been tested and meet the accessibility standards. So stuff that people know works. There is an appetite amongst you to go and open that cupboard, as I kept describing it, and to take those resources and to use them because you can be confident that they've been user tested, and that they meet the accessibility standards, Welsh language requirements, etc., that they are fit for purpose. That was a strong theme coming through again. There was a nervousness or a lack of understanding around how a design system in the strictest sense then of a design system could work for Wales in practice. Concerns around, well, does that mean we all need to have the same brand? Does that mean that we won't be able to work with this person anymore? We won't be able to do this. There was a real nervousness around that, and people were very conscious of wanting the components and the patterns, but not necessarily wanting the style and the tone and everything else that would come with it. And the resourcing of teams to deliver digital services outside of the Welsh Government as sponsored bodies, so predominantly then with the local authorities that we spoke with, and the people when you responded to the survey, we can see that the resourcing of the teams is generally quite poor outside of Welsh Gov. and sponsored bodies, so very small numbers in the teams. Numbers reducing outside of those areas, but also within some of those areas as well. Numbers are reducing as a result of tightening budgets, but an expectation on you to be delivering more digitally to help with more efficient ways of working. And so we definitely picked that up as a theme as well. The survey, we undertook the survey, and on the back of the reaction that we had to the interviews, we expected a higher response rate to the survey. We had 69 responses with English and Welsh combined. That was after we'd removed those that weren't working within Wales. So we were only looking to gather information from people who were working on Welsh public services. Not necessarily, you didn't have to be based in Wales, but you had to be working for Wales. The sectors, the breakdown then was 27% local authority, 19% health. You can see the breakdown there across the sectors. Local authority, I think we spoke with half. I think we spoke with 11 local authorities across Wales. And you can see there the breakdown then across sponsored bodies, etc. Other was, I'm trying to think what we would have covered under the other. I'll come back to that and I'll remember towards the end and I'll tell you, but that was the breakdown. And then we asked people to describe their role. Again, going back to the audiences that I spoke about at the beginning, we wanted to make sure that we were speaking to the right people. And you can see there the breakdown in the roles of the people that we spoke with. 3/4 of the people, when we asked them about their familiarity with the term design system, 75% of people said they were quite or very familiar with the term. As we went into those conversations, you could start to see that people maybe were sort of second guessing, have they understood it correctly, or they told us they didn't understand what a design system was, but actually when they explained to us how they were working, they'd created their own design systems. And there's a number of you out there have in order to do what you need to do, have created your own design systems, and they are saved maybe in a file on a shared drive or something, but you've created your own way of working, and as a team you consistently work to that, and you're trying to bring the others within your organisation to do that. But language around the term was an interesting find for us when we talk about a design system, because while 75% told us they were familiar with the term, once we went into further questions, that lack of confidence came through really, or that the understanding was different then, I suppose, between different people as they spoke about it. 48% of people said they were required to maintain a design system in their work. Again, when we dug into this, we saw variations in what that looked like, and potentially when people were referring to a design system, they were talking more about the tools that they use, the software that they use then to run certain things, rather than maybe a design system in the sense that we are talking about it. So the learning for us in that regard for the report is around language and how important the use of language is if we're looking to drive services that are consistent and experiences that are consistent. Language is the very basis of that. Really, really important that we iron that out from the start. When we asked people so the survey split at this point, and so people who told us they were working on a design system went down one route, and the people who said they weren't went down another route, and we all come back together at the end. But the top 5 things that design systems out there tend to contain is the typefaces, fonts, colours and styles, 65%, which is probably why people, when we have spoken with them and they have already got something themselves in place, we're quite hesitant and we're concerned around, does this mean you're going to inflict a new brand on us, or we're going to have to pull back from some of the things that we currently do. 59% of people said they included accessibility guidelines, and then you can see there then grid, layout, systems, components, content guidelines, so as we would expect. 62% of people, when they asked how they would rate the success of the design system that they were using, said they were uncertain or unhappy about the success of the system, and that uncertainness or dissatisfaction came from people not being able to contribute, or feeling that they could contribute to the design system in a way that suited them, that they weren't aware of what was coming down the line with particular products they were working with. They didn't know when fixes may be coming or when new updates may be coming, etc. So again, that gives us learning in terms of what could a design system for Wales look like and what's really important to you as an audience. Oh, here we are, challenges when using the design system, unable to contribute, and also the lack of confidence in the systems used. People were saying about training, they maybe had started in a new role and were told this is what we do, but the training was lacking, and often the training was lacking when, consistent with the interviews, training was lacking when teams were very small, and it was a case of hit the ground running and, you know, learn as you go, which can be very difficult. So consistency there across the survey and the interviews. Key themes when we asked about user needs and how you go about gathering user needs and the requirements for digital services, workshops, surveys and interviews came out as being the things that people most used. But what was interesting here was when we asked the question of how familiar are you with gathering user needs and how you know, are you confident in going out and gathering user needs? We had a high number of people say yes, they were confident, yes, they knew and you know, and had the tools with them to be able to do that. But as soon as we asked the question around how do you do that, we very quickly started to see a drop off. We started to see people skip the question, and so we wondered if they, again, there's an element within what a design system could look like. There's a need there for more support around how to gather user needs or the resources to assist you to do that, because it's time consuming to do it properly, isn't it? So that was one of the findings there. And then we went on to ask what people's top priorities are for the design system currently that they have. What are they pushing and what are they trying to, you know, to move forward with the design system? And adoption, leadership, buy-in and governance, really strong themes, came through consistently in the interviews as well. That people, in order to help land the system that they had developed in their area or the system that they were using from elsewhere, was if people wouldn't adopt it, then the consistency wasn't going to come. Everything became pushing water up a hill. Leadership buy-in again around this. If it's important, if it's seen as important by above, it's invested in. Over half of people there seeing the leadership buy-in was crucial as top priorities for the design system they currently have. And then governance, which goes back again to the adoption around that as well, and people having to use it, people knowing how to use it, and there being consequences for people not using it. Mandated was a word that came up a lot, as was argue. People had to argue to try and do something. People had to argue to let people know why undertaking user research is important. They had to push for resources to help them do something, and so much of that came back to these 3 points that people would prioritise for the design system they currently have. And for us, these are the things that would be important for a design system going forward. Next slide, please, Sarah. Thanks. 88% of people said they were confident in gathering user needs for digital services, but like I said in the previous questions, things dropped off. People would skip the next question when we asked how. 75% of people told us they were confident that their services met accessibility standards and accessibility needs and Welsh language standards. Again, a similar pattern to the previous question when we asked what resources do they use to do that, or how, we saw people skip the question again. Those that answered were looking predominantly to internal teams to help them. And a theme that came through in the interviews when we asked this question and we were exploring this was that people aren't always confident that what they develop meets the accessibility requirements, even when they've had them checked by an external provider. For example, there were a couple of examples where people had developed something, it had been checked or had been influenced by an external provider, but they were errors, or they were told, no, this doesn't meet as things went further down the line. So this is definitely an area where people would require support or would require more information around this as part of a design system. So the emerging themes then from the survey, the data suggests people are aware of design systems, but later questions don't indicate confidence. And that was, like I said, supported by previous conversations that we'd had. A clear lack of confidence in design systems and how they are used across Wales at the moment. Some of that again comes back to language as well, that maybe when one person refers to a design system, they don't mean a design system, or when someone else explains how they work in, actually there is a design system, but they're not aware of that. So language, hugely important. Lack of collaborative opportunities and sharing across Wales. This is more about the infrastructure to be able to collaborate and share learning and share examples and share best practice rather than the appetite. The appetite is huge amongst you to take what others are doing and to learn from that and to share what you've done and to work together, but it doesn't appear to be a known about path then, or an avenue through which you can share and make best use of each other's learning. With that, we have looked around to see what's available there and how the things that you would need to enable effective sharing. And this was one of the big conversations that we had last week when we fed back to CTPS. 48% of respondents used or maintained a design system. A third were positive about the success of the design system they use. I think that's a typo in that last line there. But of those people who are using it, they are positive about what it gives them, but there's a hesitance around the resources in place to be able to use it effectively and to drive consistent use of that. So the key findings, as we see them, are that people are aware of what a design system is, but varied views on what the term means and varied views of what the benefits of the system are. Appears to be a lack of collaboration in the Wales public sector, but a really high level of desire to learn from each other and to share, and is one of the barriers to learning and to sharing with each other. Team sizes, again, there were people who were working in extremely small teams, really keen to learn from others, but capacity meant that the time wasn't there to be able to do that. And similarly, the larger teams, roles were dissected and people knew what their roles were and had the things they wanted to share, but where was the avenue to do that? Again, we come back there to the confidence around the success of the design system that they use, or the perceived success of the design system that they use. Dissatisfaction was attributed when people weren't happy with what they had currently, was them not knowing how to contribute to use the design system or not being mandated, and therefore by not being mandated it wasn't driving consistent practices within their organisation and therefore wasn't addressing that problem statement that we set out at the beginning. Next slide. User research is happening in pockets. People told us of work that they had undertaken previously, but that often, or sometimes that the organisation is saying that it can't be prioritised, we just need to get this thing done, we can't be doing the user research now, we haven't got time, we need to move forward. The urge was there, and the understanding of why the discovery work should be done, but capacity just didn't allow for that. And a number of people felt unheard in explaining why user research was important, and that word argue came back quite frequently about, I have to argue why we need to test something. And I think it was the user research specifically was an area that people were really keen to share with others and to learn from others, stuff that had been tested and was proven to work. Absolutely an appetite for accessing patterns that are easily repeatable and, like I said, tested. those developing digital public services in Wales have a low level of confidence that they're meeting the accessibility requirements through the work. So within a design system, there's the potential to ensure that there's a lot more around how to meet accessibility standards, how to drive compliance, why there's a need to do that. There's definitely avenues there for improving. And then the most consistent theme that came throughout the research was the relationship between the senior leadership team, them being engaged in digital transformation within the organisation, and then the organisation being resourced and empowered to deliver good digital services. The main theme that came through from us, which trickles down and has a knock-on effect, obviously, then to many of the other findings there that we have. So if we move on to the recommendations as we've set them out. Before I go into the recommendations, I think it's just important to note that the problem as we see it now is around the inconsistency in the provision of digital services. The mixed experience people get is influenced more by senior leadership's view of what good digital transformation is, and then the investment into those areas. And so while the design systems or a design system may be missing, without the appropriate environment in which to land a design system, so leadership buy-in, resourcing, etc., driving those consistent ways of working and delivering consistent services will be extremely difficult. So we go into the recommendations. Recommendation 1 is that we are recommending that CDPS explore options for a design system that influences tools, components and patterns, but not brand. And when we talk about this, we're not saying start from scratch, we're saying explore the things that already exist within Wales and look at what could be advanced further. Recommendation 2 is the need to look at designing the framework for a minimum resourcing structure, and what we mean here more is skills than numbers necessarily, but a minimum structure for digital delivery teams in Wales. What skills should a team have to be able to deliver on the expectations of the digital standards for Wales? Recommendation number 3 is to identify the exemplar services in Wales to set the benchmark of what good looks like in practice, and then including the scale of resources in place to deliver those things that are identified as being good. We came across such a mix. We had so many conversations with such mixes in teams of skills, of numbers of skills, of experience, of direction. There's so much out there that can be highlighted as exemplar services that have been delivered, and also exemplar structures that are in place. And that doesn't necessarily mean massive teams. So much of it is about how the individuals within those teams recognise each other's skills and work together. So there's absolutely a need there to go and identify where these places are, benchmark what good looks like, and then to look at, okay, how can we build on this? Recommendation number 4, consider how the digital standards for Wales could be incorporated into the procurement process. So I think it came up on a show and tell, the last one or the one before maybe, and then it was repeated at different interviews that we did. But people saying that when it came to the needs to buy bilingual software that enabled bilingual services to be delivered bilingually rather than boxes that had been translated, for example, confidence in the systems that they were buying was pretty low based on past experience. Based on what we've seen, we think that if the digital standards themselves were brought into the procurement process at the very beginning, the brief to suppliers could potentially be clearer, and Wales would be looking to buy the same thing or similar things. It would be a standard for Wales that those who were engaging with us to sell products, software, etc., were aware of. When we ask for bilingual, we mean bilingual. We don't mean something that can be translated. So it's an example there of how using the standards that exist already could be brought into the procurement process, and potentially through CEED, which is the Welsh Centre for Procurement Excellence. So we can join these things up. Recommendation number 5 was to quantify the benefits of more consistent provision of digital services to the people of Wales. It's easy for me to say. What we mean by this is, we know if a design system for Wales were put in place, that's going to cost money. It's going to cost money for organisations if they need to grow their teams, or if you need to buy in different software, if you need to expand your skill sets, etc. And as we know, money's really short on the ground at the moment, but there's a need to be able to say, this is the value, this is the added value, this is the longer term savings or service efficiencies, improved services to customers, etc., that would come from proper investment into developing proper digital services for Wales. We spoke to a number of people, like I said, who believed that the leadership team saw digital services as being the website, development of the website, and the person that we spoke to who was digitising forms. We can quantify the benefits, we can justify why there's a need to spend the money, but again, that needs to be something that probably a piece of work that needs to come from the overarching work that's being done. And then the last recommendation there, but going back to what I said just ahead of going into recommendations, whereby I spoke about the need for the environment to be the right environment in order to be able to land a successful design system. Recommendation 6 is influence Welsh public sector leadership teams so they better understand the benefits and the need for shareable, tested digital services. And so while this is recommendation number 6, this is the biggie that hopefully enables all the others to land. But these recommendations will deliver some more quickly than others, and they can run concurrently. And that's it from me, I think. Next steps. So last week we presented back to CDPS. So I'll hand over to Owen now in relation to where we go after that.
Yeah, thanks, Em. I hope you all enjoyed that. Lots of detail in there, and from a Parago perspective, we have thoroughly enjoyed the last 3 months working on this discovery. So thank you for your time, whether that be completing the survey or speaking to us directly, or even attending this or previous show and tells. Without the engagement of those designing digital public services in Wales, we certainly wouldn't have arrived at the key findings or produced those recommendations, so thank you. The big next step really is we've now provided all of our findings, recommendations and further thoughts back to the CDPS, who brought us in as Parago to conduct this discovery. So it is in effect almost sort of finished from our perspective, although we'll be watching on with eagle eyes and certainly quite passionately invested in the future of this and playing our part where we need to be. So those findings, recommendations are now with the CDPS, who will give them consideration really over the coming weeks and months, I'm sure, as to where they feature in their kind of future and forthcoming plans. And yeah, we'll add some value and play our part where needed. So at this point, we'll open the floor to any questions, really.
See, there's a question there already, Owen, in the chat from Harriet. She's asking, can we comment on how governance/compliance for GEL works, and how strict is it, and how do they enforce, and how well is it complied with? And then this is in reference to Welsh Government GEL. Harriet, do you want to add to that question, or you?
Yeah, I don't know if you can see me because I think my Teams is playing up, but
I see you.
You can see me. Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking because it's a big question for us in CDPS, this whole area of compliance and kind of penalties for non-compliance, lack of spend controls, and also kind of lack of incentives to comply across our kind of challenge, really. And so I was just interested, curious to know, obviously GEL does have compliance compliance elements and governance and so on. And maybe it's a kind of a helpful insight to understand how well that is complied with, how strictly it's governed, and the effects of that.
The rest of the team can come in on that from the perspective of the conversations that I was part of with them, was that because it's operated at the moment within Welsh Government and some sponsored bodies as well, I think there's an ability to control compliance with that a bit more because it's fairly tight. We spoke with a number of different organisations using the gel. One that was using it sort of strictly to the rule book then, if you like. And they spoke about if there were things that they wanted to do, maybe there was outside of what the gel currently stipulated, or if they wanted to develop certain elements, that there was a process to go back and forth to the gel team to look for signing off, and that had worked for them. And we're aware of a couple of other parts of Welsh sponsored bodies that are using the gel but aren't using it to the letter, if you like, around style, etc., because in line with how they function, there are elements that they didn't want to use, and they came to an agreement with the gel team around how that could work. So I think the strictness around it as it in its current form is more to do with the relationship between gel and the people within those bodies who are driving that system they work with. I think there's room there for conversation rather than for a big hand that comes down and says this is what you must do. I think it's more built on respect and a mutual understanding of each other's needs. And when we spoke with Scottish Government last week, that is absolutely where they've gone in developing their design system. It's a mutual sort of shared process of learning between organisations rather than very, very strict enforcement of you must do it like this. I don't know if that answers your question, Harriet. Oh, go on.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting.
Yeah, just to build on that, Harriet. So the compliance and governance is a really crucial component, I think, to how a design system operates and works and functions really effectively. And we've spoken to people who've got a design system, but some of their colleagues aren't using it. And if there's just an acceptance that that's okay, it's really challenging because the design system doesn't have the environment to be flourishing. With gel, the thing that struck me is that there's a level of support from the team as well. So yes, there is some compliance and some restrictions and some guidelines of things have to be adopted so that Welsh Government services look and function the same. But actually there's a level of resource and support from that team who are able to guide and advise people, which I think is really useful. And as Em mentioned, there's a degree of flexibility with the gel as well, so that there are some websites or services which are funded by Welsh Government, but you might not see them as Welsh Government services because they have their own brand and identity. Things like Traffic Wales, Careers Wales, or things like that as well. So there's an element of flexibility within gel for it to have own brand and identities.
I do have another question, but I'll see if others want to come in.
No one else? Harriet, do you want to come back?
Yeah, I mean, the kind of maybe we don't talk about it enough. The point of why you would use, or the points of why you would use a design system, the benefits of a design system, and making clear the benefits. Why are we proposing this at all? What's the point? What will people get out of it? And measuring and tracking the benefit. I mean, the kind of, the obvious benefits we might say is, well, there's better user experience, more consistent user experience, and really importantly, the goal is for reduced cost because we're all using the same components. So that component doesn't have to be developed 15 times, and we're all using the same kind of content and features and so on. They don't each have to be individually designed. But I'm just wondering if there is a sense of, does it feel like, oh, this is just something we have to do? Or is there a sense of, we can see the benefit, we can see the point, we can see that there's kind of a better user experience, it's faster because we didn't have to develop that component ourselves, and it's cheaper? I didn't know if there was a sense of that at all in discussions about a design system.
Yeah, there was a sense of that, Harriet. People absolutely saw the sense in not having to do the same things over and over again. People saw the sense in using components, etc., that they knew worked and were actually effective, that, you know, there was evidence behind them that said this works for this user, rather than it being something that was designed on the hoof. I think for me, the biggest point for me is that those who benefit most from a design system from the perspective of not having to repeat work are those who are probably most likely to struggle to implement it as things currently are, and that's those in the really small teams. And I think they're the ones who actually need the benefits that would come with the design system from the perspectives of the professionals using it more than others. And as I mentioned earlier, then the local authorities, when we spoke to them, there's definitely a difference in the sizes of teams and the resources within those teams and the skill sets that those teams have outside of Welsh Government and the sponsored bodies. So the local authorities then, who are developing services for communities, are much smaller and much more hand-tied, if you like, in their ability to develop the services as we would like under a design system then. So there's definitely something there. And I know when we were presented back last week to CDPS, you know, we did speak about the hierarchy of need within the community in terms of the design and development community, and the local authorities are absolutely, you know, probably where focus should be. If focus can only go sort of to one place at a time, then maybe that's where the focus should go in the first instance.
I'll just add to that as well, Harriet, because I think it's a really great point. That I think broadly, those who are designing digital public services see the benefit, because ultimately they realise they can benefit from efficiency within their role, actually having things that have been tested and trialled and that they can use and drag and drop. Actually, so the community itself designing digital public services see the benefit. One of the recommendations, though, it probably plays on another point around what those teams often lack is the capacity and the resource to have that ability to really focus on effective design systems and designing digital public services in a way that they work well. And that's because there's perhaps this disconnect with some of the leadership teams in the public sector and that management level of understanding of the importance of user experience, because often that dictates the size and the resource of the team who are developing the services itself.
Another question and examples of how user experience can inform digital service design, and how iterative can a design system be? One of the team want to take that? So in relation to that question then, if no one else is coming in, I will pick that up. In relation to how iterative can a design system be, Simon, and do you mean how much flex can there be within a design system?
I guess. I mean, I think you touched on it in the previous conversation in a way, isn't it? I mean, I'm obviously coming more from a health and social care community focused type background, so people we generally mitigate against one size fits all type of solutions for things, you know. But overall, I think it's that idea that it's everything. Service development is a learning journey, and that design needs to keep, you know, really shape that, isn't it? And and work with it. And even if you're using a design system like the double dip diamond, is I think even now people are looking more towards triple dip and more of an iterative approach to things, aren't they? It's like, because of the level of complexity that we're working with and the uniqueness of everybody that uses systems in a way in terms of their needs and diversity. So it's just something around that really. A lot of what I've heard so far has been about controlling design in a way, rather than letting it, just letting it go, in the other way, where experience is fundamental to that.
So it absolutely isn't about controlling design. I suppose there's the element of how important governance, and consistency, how important governance and leadership buy-in is to drive consistency. But I think probably the opportunity we have here in the work that we've been asked to do is to look at what the need is, or is there a need for a design system for Wales, and what might that look like. And I think what we've picked up is, as I've said a few times, around sort of that desire to learn and to share. I think this, if you think of it as a contract, maybe sort of negotiating the contract for what could this thing look like, I think that needs to be iterative, and to be continuously testing with different communities and bringing the different perspectives, etc. in, could be sort of the bed upon which a design system could be developed from this point on. I think it's absolutely where we should go in terms of the way in which organisations are working, and I think probably starting from this point with a sort of a whole sector discovery then should hopefully give us the right foundations to be able to work in that way going forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and the other layer is this systemic view of things, isn't it, really, rather than just siloed within organisations.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there any other questions? No? Okay, Owen, no more questions?
Brilliant. Well, thank you all. Thank you all for your time, energy, and enthusiasm this afternoon in previous show and tells, and also to those of you that have played your part and contributed to this discovery. So thank you ever so much. Hope that you are able to enjoy the sunshine if it's shining where you are, and have a great rest of your day.